Welcome, sinners. I'm Jason,
And I'm Rebecca, also known as Emily Sin.
and this is the Sanctuary of Sin podcast. We will cover everything delectably sinful, from kink and queer culture to cults, sex positivity, and everything in between.
Let's get sinful. On today's episode, we're covering our next deadly sin, which is wrath, which I thought it would be good to kind of cover the demonisation of women's rage and sexuality throughout history.
From nagging wives, hysterical virgins, sex-obsessed nymphos, to the devil's concubines, outspoken, empowered women have historically been ostracised from society. Whether it be theological, physiological, spiritual, or legal, there is a long history of women being punished or cured for their rage and sexuality.
First off, let's take a look at the long and complicated history of hysteria and its surprising links to endometriosis. This is one that I hadn't heard of before. Like, I've never seen that comparison drawn. Like, I feel like when we think of hysteria, it always gets written off as just like historically a misogynistic way. It can be keeping women down and it being about like, oh, they're too emotional, they're this or that. And it definitely ended up that way, which we'll kind of cover a bit later on. But in the beginning and what it was kind of based off of, there does seem to be like a strong link between it and endometriosis.
Yeah. Aye, for me, the term kind of conjures up images of like 1950s American housewives and like alongside things like vibrators and lobotomies.
Yep.
That's kind of the general vibe I get from that term.
Like, it's interesting how it's kind of morphed into that over time, but the term actually first came up from about 2,500 years ago. So it's been the kind of solution to a problem that has been about for a long time.
Yeah.
Because of the direction that doctors and science and medicine took hysteria, it became discredited as an idea.
Right.
But the kind of roots of it and what it was based off of, though, like, the reasonings they came up with surrounding it are wild, it still points to it being, like, a very real thing that was happening to women, that was just being taken and ran with in a wild way. Mostly because they didn't believe them. They didn't believe, like, the pain, they didn't believe like, they thought they were just being hysterical women.
Yeah.
Which is why it's almost been like a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I'd say, like the way that...
Aye, because it kind of painted women a certain way for such a long time that it was kind of difficult for them to escape that sort of labelling.
Aye, that to be like the kind of destination it was headed towards, basically. Because women don't tell the truth about their own bodies and experiences. They're just complaining for the sake of it. That's... Yeah. So medicine has historically fallen on kind of either side of either magic, demonological, or scientific views. And things have took a bit of a weird journey. Like, I was kind of expecting it to go from one to the other, but there's been a bit of back and forth for the last kind of 2,500 years.
Aye, you'd sort of expect it to go from magic and demons to science.
Yep.
And there'd be a fairly kind of straight line from one to the other.
Yeah, but no, that has not been the case. Through all of this, though, there has always been evidence that women are the weaker of the two sexes. Like, that has just been, even now, that's still... I mean, that's kind of taken as, like, biological fact.
Yeah.
So whether it be from, like, a kind of weak disposition, a vulnerability to mental disorders, or that they're more easily influenced by supernatural forces and more likely to commit sinful acts, there's always been a kind of a reason why women have been not only the weaker of the two sexes, but the more kind of corruptible, and therefore the more corrupt.
Ah, yes. Prisons, famously full of women.
Yeah.
Famously mostly women that do crime.
It's a woman you don't want to meet on a dark alley.
Oh, yeah.
So, as I was saying, the first kind of reference to this kind of type of disease is was in the Eber Papyrus in Egypt in 1600 BC. It was kind of the first medical document, to have references to depressive maladies, where kind of traditional symptoms of hysteria have been noted within, in which they described seizures, as well as a kind of like sense of suffocation and death, which to me sounds a bit like anxiety, like a kind of panic attack.
Sounds like sort of anxiety, depression, like just a sort of when your like emotional feelings sort of take on like a physical aspect.
Yeah. Which, I mean, it makes sense. I feel like anxiety, as much as people talk about it like it's a new thing, it would have affected people, especially back in the day when like more traumatic stuff was happening semi-regularly. Like people were dying, and do you know, like the way that people died was like, obviously people would have been a lot more used to it back then, but it's not to say it wouldn't have had effects on them.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly find anxiety to be quite like a physical sensation heavy sort of thing.
And without the kind of words to describe that, do you know, like if you're in such a panic state that you're like shaking and stuff like that, maybe could have been taken as a seizure back then.
Yeah. I mean, I could see quite easily how like a panic attack could be mistaken as a seizure.
Yeah.
Like,
especially if someone's went like non-verbal and stuff like that, and like kind of non-responsive, like why it could be seen as such.
I think that kind of comes down to like the confines of like language, and having built that language around, you know, we're at a point where we've had thousands of years now to sort of come up with the surrounding language for things like that, to express that quite clearly and sort of distinguish it from other things. But like, don't know if that's a sort of a new concept at this time. They're not going to have like the words to describe this new different thing when to look at it looks close to something they've already encountered and got language for.
Yeah. So within this as well, there was the first documentation of, I don't exactly know what words they used to describe it, but it was later kind of termed the wandering uterus by Hippocrates.
Oh, right.
We'll cover in a wee bit, but it was kind of understood at the time that the uterus wandered about the body, kind of freely of its own will. Which again kind of comes back to this, like if somebody is in such crippling pain, especially if they're getting pain in different parts of their kind of torso and abdomen, why they would kind of link that to it being the organ like physically like moving around the body. Because when you get like period cramps, like it can feel like in all different places.
Yeah.
It's not just kind of in the one area. Like it can feel like it's kind of moving about your body, and if that's the way that they've described it, it makes sense that this is the kind of the theory that they've came up with.
You can kind of see the thinking going on there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there is some kind of thing where like organs can kind of move and be in the wrong place and it cause some issues. So I think like there is almost like this wee grain of sort of maybe science that could inform that line of thinking.
Yeah. To an extent.
Hey. I'm absolutely not saying they were right. I'm just you can see just about see why they might think a thing like that.
So the cure for this at the time was they kind of seen the uterus as like a kind of another animal, like an alive thing that had its own motivations, and as well as, of course, a sense of smell. So so the treatment for this was to use like sweet smelling substances, or like perfumes, or anything nice that was like a nice smell, either at the mouth and nose or at the vagina, to kind of lure the uterus back into position, depending on whether it was like kind of too far up or too far down, depending on where you were putting the kind of nice smelling trap, I guess. I don't know. while at the same time using like a kind of acrid or like bad, foul smelling substance at the opposite end to kind of scare it away. So it's a kind of like dual approach, like double-ended, like.
Well, I mean, that would certainly work on me. I would be likely to gravitate towards the nicer smelling away from the horrible one.
I feel like this was literally the line of thinking that went into coming up with this. Like,
yeah, like it would work on me, but like I absolutely would never dream of using it to move an organ.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Egyptians kind of were the first people to start, or at least the first documented people to kind of use this. I don't know what to call it. Like, I feel like I could coin a really like funny name, but I can't think of any of them now. Like, all I can think is dual action.
Dual action uterus seduction.
But it was later used by the Greeks as well. So in about the 5th century BC, so was that like 1100 years later? Hysteria as a term was first coined by Hippocrates, who was the father of modern medicine. You'll maybe recognise the name for like the Hippocratic Oath, and you know, he was an influential guy.
Mm-hmm. Aye, having heard some of his like thinkings, it very much felt like a fling everything at the wall and see what sticks sort of approach.
I mean, I think that's what science was in the beginning. Like, they kind of had to take that approach because there was no frame of reference, there was nothing to work from. Do you know, it was just, other than, obviously, like, the stuff that they were working from wasn't necessarily all that scientific in nature.
Aye,
like,
it very much kind of has the vibes of more of like a philosophy than like...
Yep. Well, all the physicians back then, like in ancient Greece, a lot of them, they're like a philosopher and a physician. Like, this seemed to be quite a common kind of crossover, which is why, like, is mad to think about now.
It's why you're seeing sort of like personality traits and like human behavioural traits being ascribed to an organ.
Yeah. They just they overthought things, basically. Like, the ways that they thought about things were, like, quite big picture, but then we're working with the small picture and the individual, and it just, they two things don't mesh well together, in my experience. Like, so he described hysteria as compulsive movements caused by a restless and migratory uterus in the body. So again, very similar. The kind of compulsive movement thing again kind of lends itself to like what I was saying about endometriosis and like the kind of cramps. Like, that happens anyway, but when it's to the point where it's causing people severe pain, it makes sense that it's notable.
Aye, and again, you can kind of almost see the thinking of like, this is something acting of its own accord.
Yeah.
You know, out with the person's control. It must be like some kind of sentient thing that is attacking them from the inside.
Yeah. I think this kind of goes in line with, you know, a lot of the ways that they've seen like erections and stuff like that as being like out of their control, and like the female being the failed man. Like, it was like this being internal and therefore like an issue, and like you can kind of see like the kind of lines of thinking that have led them to where they were. This is caused by poisonous stagnant humours.
Oh, fantastic. I love humours.
So for people that haven't come across humours before, this was kind of like the OG medicine, and the way that we know it today was based around the concept of everything that could be wrong with a person was because of there being an issue and an imbalance of the 4 humours within the body, or bodily fluids.
So the humours being blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile.
Yeah. And obviously we're not going to go too far into that. Like, if you're interested, go and look it up. But these not only determine somebody's health, but also their temperament. So an imbalance of these caused not only different health problems, but different kind of personality traits. And I feel like this is again kind of showing for us like where this blend of philosophy and medicine became a bit an issue.
Yeah, because it sort of managed to encompass people's morality into their health and their health problems.
Yep.
So, there's certain things that can sort of morality-based behaviours that can imbalance your humours and then cause you some kind of ailment.
Yep. You can see how that was problematic.
You can also see why that would be useful in sort of like religious cultures and
Definitely.
again ways of controlling people.
Yeah. I have to say though, like I can see where, if you were starting at a baseline of knowledge, people when they're ill tend to be quite short-tempered and quite, like, I can see totally where they've pulled this from.
Mm-hmm.
Like when people are ill and sick, like it does tend to change the way that they behave because they're in pain and suffering, and that's why. But if you don't think about like if you don't have the knowledge to think about things like that, it makes sense where you would go like, there's a cause and there's like a solution kind of thing, like a cause and effect.
Yep.
So hysteria caused by poisonous stagnant humours which are trapped within the body and require sex to be released. So in the beginning, or at least at this time period, the types of people that were being diagnosed with hysteria tended to be unmarried women, like kind of widows, like young women, virgins, and the answer to this was for them to get married and have sex. Like it very much tied into the kind of social norms and values of the time, which is where we can see it for what it is, a method of control.
Yeah. If you can reduce these people's autonomy through this kind of mystical quote-unquote science.
Yeah. It was very much used as like a kind of like a ghost story for people to kind of discourage them from living outside like regular scripts of how they expected people to behave then. Which meant that women that were more outspoken or lived their lives in a way where they weren't really conforming were therefore labelled hysterical. And this was kind of the beginnings of this, even though they very much understood it as a physical ailment at the time, rather than like a mental health one. It was very much did begin as this physical kind of thing within the body. There was, because of the humours and the kind of the way that they looked at health, there was still this kind of mental component to it, even though it wasn't necessarily described within the symptoms at that point. And kind of behavioural component. So they believed that sex widened their canals and therefore allowed room for the body to be cleansed. So doctors were quite literally prescribing sex as a way of curing this at the time.
But it had to be married sex.
Oh yeah.
You've got to get that bit down first. Got to be married.
So these toxic fumes would release themselves from the vagina of those with hysteria. Their uterus would wander freely around their body, and they would have all sorts of disorders from anxiety to compulsions and paralysis. Convulsions and paralysis. So alongside sex and marriage, they were also encouraged to fumigate their face and genitals to trick their uterus into behaving in a very similar manner to what the ancient Egyptians were using.
Yep.
So there was this kind of hangover for that was still, even though it was like over 1,000 years later, this was still the kind of treatment alongside sex and marriage.
Also kind of worked as this sort of, you don't want to end up like that, you better just go and get married and perform your wifely duties so you don't end up becoming hysterical. Like, got that sort of preventative element to it as well.
Very much so. And the thing is as well, another kind of link there with endometriosis is that there's still this kind of ongoing myth that pregnancy like cures endometriosis. But what it does is, because you're not having a period while you're pregnant, it can temporarily like reduce the symptoms of it while you're pregnant. So in a sense, if hysteria was indeed endometriosis, at least at this time, getting married and having loads of sex would have had some relief for people. Like there would have been some temporary relief for them while they were pregnant, which kind of perpetuated this like agenda. Like it would have worked as much as that shit. Like
so you get a wee 9-month holiday from horrible pain.
Yep.
At the cost of a child. So every time you want a wee break from your pain, you then get lumped with the responsibility of another child.
Mm-hmm. And every time you have a kid and the hysteria comes back and your husband or whatever ships you back off to the doctor, they're like, you're not having enough sex. Back you go. And that would have been the system. But it would have probably been blamed on other things. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's rage-inducing.
Aye, that doesn't sound like much of life.
No, 24-hour baby machine indeed.
Aye, like human puppy mill.
24/7 baby machine indeed. Like 24-hour. Oh my god, can you imagine? So Claudius Galen in the 2nd century AD kind of continued with Hippocrates' kind of theories. Quote, ancient physicians and philosophers have called this disease hysteria from the name of the uterus, that organ given by nature to women so that they might conceive. I have examined many hysterical women, some stuporous, others with anxiety attacks. The disease manifests itself with different symptoms, but always refers to the uterus. So, I found this really interesting in that, like, how did they diagnose it then? Because my understanding of what he's saying here is that, like, it has any number of symptoms, but because it's a woman, it's definitely the uterus that's causing the issue here.
Yeah, but it's the only difference. The only difference between men and women. Famously.
Yeah. And that's enough for it to just, like...
I'm finding it interesting that we're seeing more of this sort of, like, anxiety kind of language. We're sort of moved away a wee bit from this
moving closer
seizures,
into the kind of mental health side. As the language is progressing. And let's be honest, as society is becoming more, like, kind of civilised, I guess, like, people have more stresses in a way that they maybe didn't before. Do you know what I mean? As society is kind of evolving and changing, and, like, I don't know, people aren't really built to be living in cities and stuff. That's just no, like, natural for us. So it makes sense that that kind of movement was causing more kind of mental health disorders in people, and they were having to therefore come up with new terms and stuff for it.
Yeah.
So he became the kind of... Hippocrates started this line of thinking, and then Galen kind of became the kind of go-to guy for several centuries after his time. As well as his kind of treatments and stuff, which included stuff like purges, administrations of various herbs, including belladonna extract, which is nightshade.
Deadly nightshade.
As well as getting married. And also repressing stimuli that could excite a young woman. So I couldn't find anything about, like, what things excited a young woman back in 2 AD. Or 200 AD, sorry. But as we'll kind of cover a bit later on, like, the Victorians had a very similar way, where it had a very similar theory to do with hysteria, where it's mad that it lasted all that time, where women, like young women, being excitable and being excited by things could cause hysteria. And the list included things like listening to music, drawing, horse riding, as well as doing too much exercise while on their period, which is why I think even now there's still kind of like hang-ups to this where, like, if you have your period, stay at home, don't overexert yourself. Like, there was still this kind of ongoing kind of vibe with that when we were younger.
That's kind of been a big sort of point in the advertising of like period products and things, is like, regain freedom to leave your house and
actually exist as a person. Aye, there's been this kind of like answer to it, but it's because there has been this hang-up that's still been about for like
2,000 years ago.
We're saying the Victorian times, but from my understanding of this, wild.
It's another sort of like excitement being dangerous is one of these kind of through lines that you see popping up time and time again. And even the origin of Kellogg's cereal is kind of based in some kind of religious opposition to excitement.
Yeah. That has heavy roots in racism as well.
Yes.
It's like the spicy food is the demon. Like it needs to be bland. Like
yeah.
That's an interesting one as well. That's for
Flavor
another
will
day.
make people masturbate.
I mean, it is exciting.
It certainly is. I've clearly been led astray by my excitement. But aye, that's a kind of thing we see popping up time and time again. Excitement being dangerous. Yep. So kind of no surprises seeing it here.
At least at that point, they weren't being like gender specific. That's what the one thing that I'll say for them. In that very small way. Everybody was to blame. So there wasn't really any kind of contention of this as a treatment. Getting married, sex, the addition of herbs, the fumigation. These were all kind of the accepted treatments, and there wasn't really any contention of this until a wee bit later on that century, by Soranus, who was another Greek physician, who's actually considered the founder of gynecology and obstetrics. He wrote a treatise on women's health. Actually wrote that it was the toils of procreation were actually the cause. So it was like women having sex and having children that was causing a lot of these issues.
Okay.
And instead, for hysteria, prescribed sexual abstinence, hot baths, relaxation, massages, and exercise.
Well, this is starting to sound a little bit more empathetic.
Yeah.
Certainly a great leap from poison.
Literal poison.
Yep. And all these things could be actually beneficial to a person, especially if they're dealing with things like anxiety and,
Yep. And muscle cramps, that relaxation and hot bath, like the heat and things with it, like all of these things definitely would have worked.
This feels like sort of the first step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Treating the patients as people.
Yeah. A bit more holistic, which is needed, I find, for some of these issues. So he even had an explanation as to why the kind of fumigation technique, I love that word, it's fucking hilarious in this context. These 2 minutes just need to fumigate my vagina before I come out. Like,
uterus is a little bit high today.
Feeling a bit low. So he argued that the use of these kind of scent therapies worked because they relaxed and constricted the muscles. And in that sense, they probably would have.
Yeah, this guy's thinking seems to be a little bit closer to something I could get on board with.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit more based in the reality that we know and live in.
Is somebody anxious? Send them for a hot bath and a massage. Like, that's something that we would do and recommend today.
Yeah.
It's wild that this guy was existing at the same time period where people were, like, putting onions at people's vaginas and shit. Like, wild. But despite this, there were still many followers of Hippocrates, one of which being the physician Aretaeus of Cappadocia, who went so far as to consider the womb an animal within an animal, an organ that moved itself hither and thither in the flanks, an animal hungry for motherhood. So this is where it started getting into the womb is a living creature, it's hungry for dick, it's hungry for a baby, it's bored, it's restless, it's craving motherhood. and people that were going out with it that weren't like placating it, and that was what was causing all these issues, was that it was just like going on a rampage basically, and a rampage only a baby could stop.
Yeah, I feel I find the way that this is worded to be utterly repulsive.
Yeah,
like
it's vile. They just have this such deep-rooted hatred of women. Like, so I've not looked up anything specifically about Aristotle for this, but he had so many theories on women and how they were inferior to men, they were failed men. Like, that was like how people viewed things at the time. Like, do you know, everybody's heard of Aristotle. Like, he's one of the most famous philosophers of all time, but he despised women. He seen them as like, he didn't think they had anything to do with procreation at all. Like, he thought like even children were the product of men. They needed to be, because women, like, they weren't like an equal partner in procreation. Like, there was so much he wrote about and therefore influenced all these people that we've just been talking about. He
was essentially saying that women are empty fields for men to sow their seeds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
And seen them as nothing more than that.
Yep.
They were, like, the cause of original sin. They were, like, toxic. They were, like, they needed to be fumigated. Do you know, like, you can see where, like, yeah. And this guy was the influence of a lot of the kind of the way that people viewed women and therefore viewed women's health, that at the time they weren't even seen as people, to the point that the things that were wrong with them were caused by an animal that existed out with themselves. Like, even that they weren't autonomous of. Like,
this is again the same kind of rhetoric that you get with a group that the group in power want to sort of exert their power over.
Yeah.
There always seems to be this stage of, well, they're not the same as us. They're a different thing entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? You commonly see it with sort of race stuff, kind of much later on than this, but interesting to see that was the sort of view on women as well. That's, I don't know, there's only so many times I can say that it's gross.
It's really interesting to me, though, because Aristotle was the guy that... I've seen a couple of people on TikTok talking about this, and it's not true. It was one of these, like, women's stories things that I was telling you about that we're going to do a podcast episode on. With his wife being, like, his dominatrix.
Right, yep.
And the classic fucking philosopher is hilarious. Like, she was, to him, totally abhorrent. Like, he hated her. He thought she was the worst person that he had ever met. Like, constantly said fucking horrible shit about her all the time, and she beat him. Like, fair, yeah. And he said that he married her because if he could put up with her, he would see the best in the rest of humanity, or something like that. There was some kind of quote from him that was along the lines of that.
Well, that's vile.
But I find it mental. Like, how has he got all these views of women when he's getting, like, battered the fuck out of by one, like, on the regular? And she's, like, constantly at him, like, really domineering, really controlling. Like, how can he see her as weak? Like, was this him playing out his fucking fantasies at his work because he was going home and no having that experience? Do you know what I mean? I don't know. But so Hippocrates' followers proceeded to write over 60 books, which are collectively known as the Hippocratic corpus. They're still widely debated and read today. They're really important.
So these, like, sort of medical
texts. Yeah.
Cool.
Him and his followers came to be known as the Hippocratics because he had, like, a school of knowledge, and he had all these followers, and, like, they kind of...
They sort of, like, formalised, like, a school of medicine.
That still survives today. Yeah. Obviously, a lot of it has been changed and updated and stuff, but they formed the basis of modern medicine as we know it today.
This is why doctors take the
Hippocratic Oath. Yeah. Like, this is where, like, the philosophy bit comes in, because it was all about, like, what it means to be a doctor and
Aye, some of the kind of ethical
the
considerations.
ethical side of it is a lot of what's still used today, rather than the actual medical, which obviously is very outdated. Well, you would think, but anyway, yeah. Some of it has managed to survive, which is wild, but yeah. So Hippocrates viewed the following 4 factors as highly predictive of gynecological disease. Menstrual dysfunction is the cause. Pregnancy is the possible cure. Pain and infertility are potential outcomes if the woman is left untreated. As I've said, nearly 2,500 years later, they still correspond nearly seamlessly with the set of symptoms identified today as emblems of endometriosis.
Yeah.
As mentioned, there's still this ongoing myth that endometriosis is cured by pregnancy. In fact, when I went and looked it up, there's people on Reddit for as soon as a year ago that are still claiming that they've been given this advice from medical professionals. So
that's absolutely wild, especially like considering like the kind of modern day implications of having a child.
Yeah.
A couple of 1,000 years ago, families were a lot bigger. Mm-hmm. There was a lot more sort of like community looking after children, and even going back, 100 years, things are a wee bit different. But modern day, advising people to get pregnant and have a child for a 9-month break in symptoms.
Well, it's
crazy.
This is the scary part, because it's no that they're advising this for a 9-month break in symptoms. They're advising this as a cure, which is a myth. Oh. A 2,500-year-old myth that is still existing within the fucking medical community today. Nothing surprises me at this point, but that really shook me. Like,
I mean, the medical community has got a ways to go to kind of bring this equality for women. Even some of the things you've told me about, like the kind of the money and resources and research that's been done into certain things for men versus for women.
Erectile dysfunction versus endometriosis is disgusting. There was a point a couple years ago, I think it was 2019 or maybe 2018, where the only research study that had been done on endometriosis was if it affected women who were less attractive more.
Wow. Yeah. That's gross.
That's very gross. So one Hippocratic author warned that if they have never been pregnant, the deranged state of menstruation is more common and more dangerous than when they have born children, and that she will be released from the disease when she is pregnant. So again, this is just kind of in line with what we're saying, that even like that this was the advice of the day. I love the term deranged state of menstruation.
Aye, that term could only have been created by a man.
I love the implication as well that if I'm right, a woman being in pain is equated to them being deranged. Yeah. Like, they couldn't possibly just be in pain.
There's got to be some sort of moral failing. And
yeah. Like, they're literally insane.
Yeah, not like when men are in pain.
No. So, moving forward a bit. The early Middle Ages, or the kind of Dark Ages, were not a time of science. If you look at the kind of surrounding landscape of what was going on at the time, like between 30 and 60% of the population had died of the plague, or were dying of the plague during this time within Europe. There was wars, there was famine, there was empires falling and new ones kind of trying to come up in their place. Like, it makes total sense why science just totally got put on the back burner at this point. It was essentially like the full Europe got a terminal illness. Like, everybody turned to God. Everybody turned to salvation and the afterlife and morality. And from that stemmed witches and demons and the devil. And, like, all of this stuff became the forefront to answer what was going on.
So this is where we see our sort of strange sidestep from the progress of science kind of, to demons and sort of mythology and superstition.
Yeah. Which is totally understandable. Like, you can see...
It's understandable, but it is wild.
It is wild. Like, things were very, like, quote-unquote, like, civilised. You know, things very much did take a back step during this time. And I don't know about you, but, like, when I don't know a lot about the Dark Ages. Like, I know bits and pieces. Mostly thinking
that's
about, like,
kind of the point.
like Ren fairs and, like, the way that they're kind of portrayed in media rather than, like, how it was. But I didn't realise it spanned such a long period of time.
It's a surprisingly long period of time.
Like, they reckon it was about 900 years, kind of start to finish, and things just stood still. Like, progress was just like, nah, we don't need it now, we just need to survive. Like, basically everybody was just in survival mode. Art, culture, science, medicine. Like, it was mad that medicine during a plague was like, nah, we don't need that. Fuck that. We need fucking churches. We need like witch hunters. Like,
we've had our own little glimpse into that. You know, during COVID came this rise of like science denialism, and
that is a very interesting point. Actually, I never thought of that.
Do you know, like the groundwork had already been laid for it, and has been for years and years, but there was this massive uptick in people not trusting science, not trusting medicine,
like, authorities, and yeah.
Because what they felt they were seeing at the time didn't necessarily line up, or do you know, they were being told about vaccines and vaccine effectiveness, and do you know, because they didn't necessarily understand the scientific language or how it actually worked, they were going, well, what they've told me is wrong, or they've changed their mind from what they were saying a few weeks ago. But they kind of have always seen that science is this like infallible fact.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So for a scientist to come out a few weeks later and say, oh, this thing that we said before, turns out that's not actually how things are more like this. That sort of just eroded all the
trust,
and confidence in this, like, oh, science will save us. Do you know? So I can very much see how, in a much more severe outbreak,
that happened at a much bigger rate. Yeah. But just with what was available at the time to kind of turn to, rather than like chlorine enemas and bleach enemas and shit. It was fucking witch trials and
far more exciting.
Depends on who you were, I guess. Depends on how many of your family had died. Aye, so to get a glimpse of where people's heads were at the time, I've got a quote from a revered scholar, Lactantius, from the 4th AD. He kind of questioned the need for any further scientific inquiry, asking, what purpose does knowledge serve? What blessing is there for me if I should know where the Nile rises, or whatever else under the heavens the scientists rave about? So this kind of culture of thinking kind of led to quite like a disturbing change in views, as we've been saying, from a kind of scientific way of looking at things to an scientific for the time to one of kind of witchcraft and demonic possession.
You can see why, if everybody round about you is dying, and it feels like an inevitability that you are going to die young from this disease, that what is the point in trying to fix that?
The problems, yeah.
Why not move your focus to your immortal soul?
Yeah.
That's going to be about forever.
Like, people were terrified, and there was plenty of people that were willing to capitalise on that fear. Mm. You know, a lot of what kind of led people to this way of thinking was the preachers and their kind of focus on, like, God was punishing everybody and there needed to be, you know, like, it left room for, like, people to get mass fucking influenced by the church.
Aye, because what they're offering is hope.
Yeah.
And in this time when there is no possible hope for you right now. They're offering hope for your eternal soul, and that's, I imagine that would have been some comfort.
Aye, that moved up the priority list when you could die any second, basically. So with this kind of hysteria moved from what was essentially a physical ailment to one that was a more kind of psychological one or a morality one.
Yeah.
Which kind of went hand in hand at the time because mental illness was sin.
Yeah.
So when things moved to it being more psychological at that point, became more blame based and more about your behaviour and your faith.
It feels like it's taken sort of mental health a long time to begin recovering from this point.
Well, this is why it's still taboo now.
Yeah.
Because mental health, like people talk about these days, like, oh, mental health didn't exist. It did. It just was seen as like the devil for like thousands of years. Like for over 1,000 years, people seen people that had mental illness as people who were possessed by demons.
Yep.
And
it was some sort of moral failing on their part.
Yeah. That had led them to be in that situation. So like you can understand why people, there's still this kind of leftover stuffy, like people not wanting to talk about mental health because it's seen as being immoral.
Mm-hmm.
Even if people don't know why that is now. That feeling's still there. That knowledge is still there.
We've seen that quite a few times with the things we've talked about, the sort of the why behind it sort of getting lost over time.
Yeah.
But that idea of that thing being bad or whatever still persists. Yet nobody could really point to what the actual reason for that is.
Yeah. Well, this is the reason in this one particular case. Aye, so it moved away from being this kind of biological need for procreation to the presence of evil. So at around 600 AD, Greek physician Paul of Aegina suggested that suffocation of the womb was an illness that usually afflicted lascivious women or those who used drugs to prevent conception. So this was the first kind of documented kind of quote that I could find of somebody who started to kind of point specifically to behaviours as being the cause of hysteria, as it was known then. It moved from the wandering of the womb to them being like, nah, it doesn't wander, like it's an organ.
Yep.
They've got an understanding of that at this point, that it's not just willy-nilly flapping about in the body.
It's moved on from being a creature.
At this point, I mean, it's still been suffocated at that point. Like, there's still this kind of like,
right.
I'm not saying that they still think it's a creature, but they've still kind of like personified it in a sense, even in the language that they're using surrounding it, because they're seeing it as being suffocated. So suffocation of the womb, which again, period cramps, constriction, I can see where suffocation comes in. Like at this point, this is what's like kind of starting to line up even more with this kind of theory. Yeah, so the suffocation of the womb is specifically at this point getting the sluts and those who didn't want kids.
So the womb is being suffocated
by God?
By God, or by their actions? Is this or is it punishment for their actions?
I think it's that. I think it's the, you know, like God wants us to have kids. That's why he gave you a womb in the first place. Mm-hmm. And if you're overusing it and not for children, or if you're specifically not having kids, like by taking medications, then you're going against God's will and
you shall be punished.
You. Yeah. Cool. Is my understanding of what was going on at that. Kind of in line with that, we've got our first female contributor to the mess that is the history of hysteria. Hildegard of Bingen, who was alive between 1098 and 1179. She was a German doctor who kind of resumed Hippocrates' work around humoral theory, which is fucking hilarious. Like, wild choice. Because they were way past... Well, I mean, they weren't really. At the end of the day, do you know, this is the kind of point that we were making earlier, where we were several hundred years past this, but
we'd had that period of stagnation where things kind of ground to a halt. So this is just picking back up
where
the
they
other
were,
side of this.
even though it was so long later, which, yeah. So she attributed black bile to the original sin. So some of the early autopsies that they had done during the kind of early first centuries, obviously that was really fucking frowned upon at that time. That was not standard practice by
doing an autopsy.
So there's no much written about them, because any that were done in secret, because it was kind of against the kind of morality, what was acceptable at the time.
That always struck me as a sort of, that was quite a big step away from the sort of religious and moral.
Yeah, messing with dead bodies was pretty frowned upon, especially cutting them up, and they were sacred. They were.
I mean, obviously, like the Egyptians had a wee dalliance with cutting into bodies, but
they weren't doing autopsies.
That was kind of
they were, but they weren't. That wasn't the purpose. Do you know what I mean?
But you'd think that there'd be kind of some kind of medical understandings and things would have been picked up from there, but that was kind of specifically a religious sort of ritual thing going on. But outside of like religious practices, I find it wild that
wasn't the first thing they
got
did.
to the point of cutting into bodies.
So they'd had a wee dalliance in that, but secretively. And when they had been looking into hysteria, they had discovered that there had been, in one patient, there was like cysts on the ovaries, and when cut open, black bile came out of them.
All right.
So there had already been this kind of link between hysteria and the kind of like womb diseases with black bile. So this is where she has picked that back up and went, black bile, original sin, mate.
Definitely couldn't have been like clotted blood or...
No. So she had seen melancholy, which was depression, sadness, as known back then, and very, very highly linked with hysteria, because who were the most melancholic people of the time? Women. Who were the most hysterical people of the time? Women. So they were both kind of not interchangeable as such, but very interlinked and kind of seen as one caused the other and stuff.
I think after seeing this sort of treatment that women got as a result of showing emotion, you can really see why it's so baked into our culture that men shouldn't show emotion.
Yeah,
because
they'll be seen as women.
God forbid they start getting this treatment. That would be terrifying.
Yeah. Aye, so like sad and depressed, melancholy.
Yeah.
Angry, irrational, anxious, hysteria. That was the kind of, like, the emotions, any emotion was quite easily put into these different categories.
Yep.
Where there were afflictions, either in the body or in the mind, or in the moral soul, as our pal Hildegard seen. So she's seen melancholy as a defect of the soul, rooted in evil and therefore incurable.
She's really found herself on the wrong team here.
Yeah.
I mean, props to her for managing to become a doctor in this time.
Yeah.
But
I feel like it was probably in name only.
In
the sense that I highly doubt in 1098, I'm assuming that was when she was born, so let's say 1130, that she was being accepted as a doctor. I could be wrong. Maybe Germany was further forward at that time period than I would imagine the rest of Europe. But so she was also the first that I found anyway who attributed melancholy and hysteria to both men and women. Because to her, Adam and Eve shared dual responsibility for the original sin, were seen as equals in the eyes of God, and therefore were both victims of melancholy and hysteria and a sin, essentially.
That's a little bit more
a wee bit progressive. So men were seen as ugly and perverse, and women were slender, unable to think freely, and infertile due to their weak and fragile uteruses. Always back to the uteruses. There's no like men were ugly and perverse because of their dicks.
Or
There's
because they
that.
had weird balls.
Yeah.
Melancholy is stored in the
Wandering balls. That float freely around their body. So the mainstream view at the time was still very much that women were intellectually, theologically, and physically inferior to men.
Yep.
And we still see that today. Do you know, that's not something that has entirely gone away. Or indeed started at that time. Do you know, this has just been how society, since society has came into being, has treated women.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's been a necessity for it to function. But that is besides the point. So this idea, as we've said, has roots in Aristotelian concept to the kind of male superiority, women inferiority, and the idea that the woman is a failed man. Thomas Aquinas, from kind of 1225 to 1274, wrote Summa Theologica, which kind of confirmed Aristotle's theories and kind of advanced on them. He wrote that the inferiority of women was rooted in sin, that women were, some women, mostly old women, specifically, for some fucking reason, but yeah, were evil-minded, conferring with demons who were able to like enact their will through their eyes, so they could just look at you and like the demons would get you. They gazed on children in a poisonous, evil way, jealous of their youth. Like, I feel like this is where this old witch in the woods, like, eating children thing comes from, is fucking Thomas Aquinas, and the granddaddy of his ideas, Aristotle.
Well, this also, do you know, with it being kind of mostly older women and things, this kind of, to me, immediately feels like they're saying, these are women that are no longer desirable to me.
Yeah.
Therefore, they must be bad.
Yeah.
They serve no purpose.
Exactly. The types of women that were labelled with these labels tended to be the ones that were sexually undesirable. Whether that be because of sexual promiscuity, like their anger, their general demeanour way being, them being argumentative, them being scolds, or them being widowed, too young, or too old. And these were the most, by far, people that were not only diagnosed with hysteria, but also labelled as witches, which we will come back to. So the preachers at the time were also disclosing the Old Testament's condemnation of witchcraft and sorcery that was kind of adding to this ongoing fear of just women in general. Never mind women being witches, but just women in general, because nobody was safe. To the point that the ecclesiastic societies actually imposed celibacy and chastity on their clergy as a way of protecting them from the evil, wicked ways of women that still exist today. That's still an ongoing thing in a lot of the churches, because the witches might get them. Because the poisonous old women might send demons out from their eyes to smite them. Or not smite, sorry, that's God's words.
Interfere with them.
Yeah, we'll go with that. So the church was kind of struggling at this point. There were some new kind of humanist theories that were coming out for the philosophers. Like, things were starting to move a wee bit further away from religion, and in terms of like the morality and the ways that people were looking at the best way to live a life, what it means to be a good person. Like, things were starting to kind of, I don't want to call it science, but like move away from the kind of traditional religious ways and more into like humanist theories, as I've said. So the church had to step its game up. They were losing kind of political control. They were losing money. Really, that was the big one. They were losing influence, and they were losing power, and they were losing money.
Their business was failing. So
They had
to find a new gimmick.
Yeah. So, boom. heresy. Anybody who had anything negative to say about the church became a victim of it. We've kind of touched on this a wee bit before, with how the church kind of labelled everybody heretics, any kind of opposing religions, any rival businesses, any rival companies. They were doing a hostile takeover. They were labelling them heretics. They were going on, they were killing everybody, and then they were getting all their buildings, their lands, their titles. Not their titles, but their buildings, their lands, their wealth. And once the church had kind of ran out of other businesses to do this way, they had to focus in on the population.
They always need a good baddie.
So they were attempting to unify Europe under the one banner, which kind of led to mental illness and hysteria as being labelled as links with demons, the devil, and people began to be exorcised as treatment for a lot of these mental illnesses, including hysteria. The church became the doctors.
Yep.
So by about 1484, this instability of Catholicism within Europe kind of led to the intensification of the inquisitions by the church as they kind of tried to regain this control that they were slowly losing. And the witch hunts in Europe began.
Oh, fantastic.
So the German Dominicans, Heinrich and Sister Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, are accredited with the publication of the infamous Hammer of Witches, or the Malleus Maleficarum, in 1486. Maleficarum being specifically witches, as opposed to the wizard equivalent Maleficorum, further driving home the point that to be female is to be, without question, evil.
Yep. You've got, it's official now. We've got official books and documents to say that it's the women and not the men.
I find it really interesting that this shift from science to witches and wizards and fucking necromancers and demons and shit, back to science again. In almost direct parallel, you've got hysteria and melancholy moving to witches and then moving back to hysteria again. Like, it's all part of the same thing.
Yep.
It's just the same, like it's serving the same purpose under a different name.
Mm-hmm. Aye.
And I've never heard of that link before, but you can literally watch it happen.
Aye, like I've heard of these things all kind of isolated on their own and gone, yep, right, that sounds horrible, but fine, whatever. I didn't realise that it was just kind of one continuous journey.
Yeah.
That it was all the one thing, the one kind of sustained attack on women.
Yeah.
For all this time. And it's pretty, like, difficult to just even sit and hear this.
Yeah.
Like,
aye, it's hard listening, it's hard reading. Like, this took it out me because it's so difficult. I think when you hear about this stuff, sometimes it's easy to hear it from a distance.
mm-hmm.
And know, can you imagine yourself in that situation? And I think this is why a lot of the time people do tend to think of people in the past as different from people now because of the atrocities and the things that have happened. It creates this, like, oh, they didn't know any better. Like, it almost, like, infantilizes the people of the past, and it's like, that would never happen now, in a sense.
Yeah.
Like, it allows that kind of deniability. I don't know, as you dive deeper into these things and you start looking at things and you start looking at, like, people's thought processes and realising that people are the exact same as they've always been,
mm-hmm.
it hits so much closer to home reading about stuff. Like, it makes it more difficult to keep that distance there.
Aye. The kind of main difference between then and now feels like we've all just had sort of collectively centuries of experience where the side that is oppressing women and oppressing, any groups that don't
meet the white man thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have learned to get sneakier and more subtle, whilst the other side have learned that they've got power in numbers and can call it out.
Yeah.
But it just feels like this constant just slight shift of they get one step sneakier and the other side gets one step bolder about calling things out.
Yeah. I feel like this leans into as well, like, this argument of, do you know, what's natural, like women's natural submission to men. And it's like, why the fuck have they had to go to all this trouble to uphold this if that's the case?
Why has there been a fight for thousands of years? If it was natural, there would have had to be no effort put in.
And not just a fight, but a fight where they've had to burn people. Like, do you know what I mean? It's not just been like a wee squabble. Like, they've actively had to put the fear of death in people to get them to comply. Like,
anything taken
and they still haven't.
That much work cannot possibly be natural.
No.
Like, that's systematic control. Like, that's fighting against the tide of nature.
Yeah.
Like,
so circling back to the Malleus Maleficarum, the text itself is actually really reminiscent of the medical texts from the day, exploring the link between physical ailments and those who work with demons and the devil. So this is just further kind of attributing physical illness and physical and mental illness with sin and the devil and morality. It explains in 3 parts how infertility, pestilence and famine are caused by the devil with the help of his witches, showing evidence of their existence and how to find and punish witchcraft. It also explains how, if the reader disbelieves any of the texts, that is the work of the devil himself, meaning that anybody who argued with him was also labelled a witch, wrapped up in a neat little bow. But the fucking mind games as well, like, that's straight out the cult manifesto. Like, at that point, that person, if you are reading that, you're like, shit, the devil's got me. Like, it just pulls you further into the system.
Yeah, and I think then when you get people in that kind of state where they, you know, if they've had that doubt and then, oh, the devil's got me, they're far more likely to then try and pass that blame on to, oh, well, it must be this wee old woman for down the road. She's using her devilish powers to make me think like that. Mm-hmm. I couldn't possibly
be to blame
for that.
Because, of course, females are inferior to men, and therefore, like, if that's a man in that position, it couldn't possibly be him. It's his maid, it's his wife, it's his daughter, it's that old woman down the road. Like, you can see how this encouraged a witch hunt, because it was setting people up to need somebody to blame.
Yeah. It incentivized them to shift the blame from themselves.
Yeah. To save their immortal soul. This was, like, it's quite a neat trick. Like, it's horrible, but, like, you can see why it worked so well. So this led to a worrying trend, where if a physician couldn't discover the cause of an illness, then it must be the workings of the devil. And because they obviously knew so little about just generally things anyway, but, like, specifically women's illness, because everything, it sounded like anything that was wrong with a woman was her uterus. Mm-hmm. Anything that was wrong with a woman typically ended up being hysteria. So, and because they didn't understand what the chat with that was, and a lot of people were saying that was because of sin anyway, like, anybody who was labelled as hysteria was susceptible to then being labelled as a witch. And it did happen a lot. So, mental illness itself was condemned as a sin, as the devil is more able to interfere with those predisposed to hysteria and melancholy, which of course again is women.
Yep, weak-minded, weak-souled.
Yeah, all just weak.
Yeah,
but they're seen more as people now, only in the sense that
they're conniving.
they're sneaky, they're
They're
conniving.
in league with
They
the
have
devil.
the autonomy to do the devil's work.
Yep.
But nothing else. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Aye,
their
their autonomy extends to
evil.
making the bad choice.
Yeah, to badness. Yeah. Even the Latin word for female, which is femina, comes from fe and minus, which means to have less faith. So even the language was set up to show that women were not as pious, were not like as faithful, and therefore were more likely to be in tow with the devil. Over the next 300 years, thousands of women were tortured, captured, and killed in the name of witchcraft.
How depressing. And on that bombshell.
Wait, is that Top Gear? I miss Top Gear. And with that, we have covered at least the historical side of hysteria. And we'll be continuing this on next week with the witches of Scotland.
Yeah, quite a good wee transition there.
Yeah. It's a shame it's not on one episode, but...
Aye, I think there's just a bit too much to say on...
it's too interesting.
On like 2,500 years worth of history.
Yeah. Well, we're not even up to date yet.
Yeah.
Really, this was the first 1,500 years.
Aye.
But, yeah. Come back next week, guys.
All right. See you next week.
Bye. Thanks for joining us, you filthy little sinners. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
We're keeping this podcast deliciously ad-free, so if you want to support what we do, head over to our Patreon and join our Church of Sin.
If you're craving some new personally recommended kink gear, check out our website, thesanctuaryofsin.com, for all your naughty needs, and use the code SINPOD at checkout for a 15% discount.
Got ideas, feedback, or just want to tell us what made you blush? We'd love to hear from you.
You can find all our socials, including Instagram, Twitter, and FetLife, on our Linktree, which is linktree/thesanctuaryofsin. Thank you for sinning with us.
And don't forget to tune in next time for our next confession.